Hello, I'm Chris Claremont and I freaking love freaking comics. You got a problem with that?
Yo, my name is Donnie Cates and I know the brand is I freaking love comics, but I fucking love comics.
Comics, movies, TV, video games, anime, your powers combined. I freaking love comics.
Live with Tito and Robo.
What's up, IFLC fans? This is Judah Rad. I'm here with Robo and Ree, and today we have a very special guest. She's written sex columns. She hosts a podcast. People are into that, which is awesome.
Why are people into that?
Why are people into that? Excuse me.
In the form of a question.
In the form of a question. Just like Jeopardy. Right?
But the answer is people are into that. So you're like cosmic brain about it. Yeah.
And also the writer of SfSx, SfSx, and it's awesome. We're going to talk a lot about that. And then just one last thing. If you haven't read SfSx yet, you oughta. It'll be on sale as a trade paperback on July 22nd, and you should pre-order it from your local LCS so you can support SfSx, but also your local LCS.
100%.
So do that.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for joining us, Tina.
I'm
Hi.
so happy to be here.
Yes, thank you, Tina, for being here with us. The boys are in Hawaii, but I'm in Australia, so it's pretty early in the morning for me. What time is it for you where you are?
Well, I'm gonna be a bit mysterious because I'm like moving from sort of like one safe space to another with a lot of like uncertainty, as there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. So I'll say it's mid-afternoon. I'm gonna be a little mysterious about that because I don't where people are right now and where they're moving to is such a contentious topic. So I'll just say I don't.
Okay.
It looks idyllic where you are. Yeah.
It really has been. It's been we're healthy and doing good and also trying to like do the best. We're like isolating for the greater good, as we all should be. So
Nice.
yes, that's my weird answer to that.
I love that.
Awesome.
You started a podcast just like us. What gave you the idea to do that?
I started Why Are People Into That, my podcast. That point where it's like over 5 years and you're like, wait, is it 6 or is it going on 7?
Yeah.
It's something like that. Because I love the sound of my own voice. I've totally been doing. Actually, I've been making radio like since I've been reading comics, which is to say, like since I was like 2. And back in my like single issue like superhero comics days, I was also like making radio like on a boombox like in my like childhood closet. So I think we could probably like track my like comic love history with my radio love history.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so I had just finished grad school, and I had also spent a long time working in both the sex industry and then in media and publishing and various like entertainment fields, both like underground and mainstream, with sort of sexuality, particularly like queer and kink and slutty sexuality. I should ask you what the profanity limitations are.
None.
Sky is the limit.
None.
Great. Perfect. I was like,
we're gonna throw like images, but this will be on YouTube. So like the images that we share from your book will probably have some little blurred things, or we'll use like our symbol to like make
perfect.
it YouTube
Oh my god, that is actually just what this comic needs. Is like your logo.
Swear away.
The nipples. Hey, everybody, that's a teaser. There's nipples in my comics, they say.
Oh no.
Anyway, so I know so many people who are really comfortable and confident talking about sexuality, and there's a lot of really lousy sexual representation, both fiction and nonfiction, both in journalism and entertainment, out there in the world. And so just like you guys have a conversation show, I also love listening to sort of free form, tangenting, like free association, stream of consciousness conversations with people, of people who know a lot about what they're talking about. Like I love sort of voyeuring in or listening in to people who are having those conversations and sort of absorbing and learning in that way. And so I kind of just wanted to make my own platform for that. And the thing that is really great about Why Are People Into That is that I do so many different kinds of work with so many different platforms. And I love working with editors. I love working with producers. I love working with artists. I love, other artists and other mediums and all kinds of collaborators. And I have more patience for hearing people out and collaborating in that way because I have this thing that is purely mine, where I make all the shots, but I do have a different guest every time. So it's always a meeting of the minds between me and my guest, but I'm the one woman band behind it all. So
that's so enriching. I love it.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, it's kind of like, you sit there and a lot of people go you listen to shows, you're like, "Ugh, if I were king for a day, if it were my show, I'll sit there and go." But then here we get to do it. All right, it's your show, do it then.
Yeah, I think anybody who's if this was my show, either needs to make their own show or have a seat.
That's right.
So I don't know.
So much, as you guys know, so much goes into making it that if it's done right, it's invisible.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. I feel bad for Robo all the time because he does all that editing, and I don't think people understand how much time and effort that takes.
I'm 2:30 in the morning. I'm sorry, guys. I'm apologizing. Sorry, guys. Well, I'll get this uploaded in the morning.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know if the boys mentioned to you, Tina, but I have myself done sex work in the past, and I have a question.
So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, look, I'm so happy to hear you giving this platform to sex workers, especially in the interviews in the back of your issues. That's so rad.
I'm so glad.
And I've never read anything like Safe Sex before where it's this really accurate representation of sex work. It's not the one extreme to the other, like you say in some of the interviews. It's not the damsel that needs rescuing. It's not the empowered. It's just real. It's awesome. Yeah. But my loaded question for you now is, why do you think sex work is not considered real work by a lot of people?
God, what a great question. I think the simplest way of answering that is that people get distracted by the sex and then start thinking about whatever the word sex brings up in their mind, which could be a lot of prurient interest appealing porn movies in their head, in Saga when you see the porn on Prince Robot's screen. Yes. I think that I literally just realized that's kind of what happens to people when you say sex work. The porn starts playing in their head, and then their emotional reaction to that, which is oh wait, everyone can see the porn playing in my head, but it's you're not a robot, you're human. And
that's right. Giant TV. That's right.
Yeah. So I think that people get distracted by both their positive and negative associations with sex, because also, unfortunately, when people hear sex, then a lot of shame and fear and confusion and misinformation also comes up for them. Which is part of the reason that the term sex work has even been, was created by Scarlett Harlot as part of the sex worker rights movement in the maybe about 20 or 30 years ago, to put an emphasis on the labor part, on the work part,
and legitimizing that it's work.
And so that we can you also can't leave the sex part out, because sexual politics, sexual desire, human sexuality, are a part of sex work in the same way that, I don't know, style is a part of the fashion industry. But when because I think we needed to tip the scales back and you can see people's like brains start to like crank into gear when you're like, oh, my thoughts about labor rights, like my thoughts about like the politics of labor also apply to this form of work.
That's right.
Is you know, and that's from the
or
from
that's the
political
goal
side of
anyway,
it.
right?
Right.
That's the goal. And then, you know, from the more like social part of it, I think that there is there's so much misinformation about like that there is only one kind of person that does sex work for only like one kind of reason, or that even if there's a lot of different reasons, they're all ultimately negative and people have a lot of biases. And then people have a lot of fear because there's so much misunderstanding, and people assume like if their friend says that they are doing sex work, first of all, like they don't know, does that mean prostitution? Does that mean doing fetish work? Does that mean that they are making porn? Does that mean that they're performing in porn? And people, does that mean they're a stripper? And people have different ideas about like the legitimacy of all of those different forms of work. And we talk about in the sex worker rights movement, we talk about this idea of the horror hierarchy that we call the horarchy, where there's like this like perception. I actually like gave a lecture on that a few years ago at like an occult bookshop called Catland in Brooklyn that I just dug up during quarantine. I dug up like the footage of it and edited it. Speaking of editing, and put it up on my podcast for the end of this month, which is May. So if people want to learn more about horarchy, you can subscribe to Why Are People Into That? But anyway,
sold.
Yeah, and I think people have these like personal concerns that like if their friend or their family member or even their like coworker in another field is like, oh, I'm moonlighting as a sex worker, I used to do it, or whatever, then they're like, I'm worried about all these things, and then all this like concern trolling happens before people ask how is that for you? Do you like it? What is it like? Are there things that are tough? How can I support you? Like, what do you think I should know about this thing? And there is also, to bring it back to safe sex and storytelling, there is a lack of representation of the lives of sex workers in media that is created by people who actually have experience as I do in the industry. And also even, you know, like the fact that you have experience in the industry and you're choosing to be out while you're talking about comics is like, yeah. And also, by the way, we have like other interests, like besides just the fact that we're
you're not one
we like
person. Yeah, that's it.
It's imagine that people aren't just a caricature that appears in like certain movies, you know.
I love that advice though, Tina. Like, ask questions. You know, ask questions. That's what it boils down to. You mentioned before as well. You can think of lots of poor examples of representation, right? So going back to queer representation, which you have a lot of in safe sex, I can think of lots of bad examples of queer representation. You know, when you're reading it and you're like, this person's never spoken to a gay person in their life. It comes across very stilted and robotic. Could you recommend us some good examples of queer reading or watching?
Well, that's a great question too.
Besides you.
Yes, me. No. No, I mean, that's one thing about like, you know, like safe sex is not just about it's not just about sex workers or even just one there's like lots of different kinds of sex workers, and there's also lots of different kinds of queer people, and there's also like lots of different kinds of kinky people, and like you see sort of like the intersections of what that means for different people who have other identities that affect how those identities or those like lifestyles are what their experience is in this like sort of dystopian world of safe sex. But to answer your question, I mean, to me, the best representation of queerness in TV right now is Pose, and I think that is because for the reason that we were just talking about with sex work, and by the way, there is great sex work representation in that show as well, is because it is not only like the characters are, it's not just the characters that are queer, and it's not just that most of the characters are queer, and it's not like you were saying just like a token person thrown in by a straight person who is maybe like never talked to anyone who has like one gay friend, and they're like basing it on their one gay friend, or they're like basing it on what is the character?
Will and Grace.
Yeah, you know what? For some reason, the token character that is coming into my head is the character from the movie Mannequin. Do you guys remember Mannequin?
No.
Oh my God! None of you. Okay, Mannequin is like a very 80s movie about a mannequin that comes to life. I think she's like an ancient Egyptian princess. Anyway, there's like
there's like a romance. It's like a rom-com kind of thing, or
yes, it's like
I think I know what you're talking about.
supernatural rom-com. I feel like in the vein of like Splash. Why don't they make those anymore? Maybe we should make them.
It's like a weird science kind of deal, right?
Exactly. Yes, it's like roughly the same era. Why do we not have imagination in our rom-coms anymore? Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. So Pose, I would definitely say. I guess I should mention I'm a little biased because I did some consulting on the dominatrix scenes in the second season of that, but I loved the show before I worked on it.
What was that like?
It was really rad.
That sounds like fun.
So I got to work on set with Janet Mock, who is incredible and probably the most powerful, influential, creative professional who is also out about having done sex work. So the fact that she is like show running Pose now is really amazing. And then Jenny Livingston, who actually directed the documentary Paris is Burning, was the director that day. So I got to like work one-on-one with them, and they listened to my feedback. I mean, it was also really nice because sometimes I've done consulting with people who really have no fucking idea what they're talking about when it comes to and that's why they hired me, and I'm glad that they did. But it's also really nice when you're coming in as a consultant and like there's already even more than like a base level of understanding, and so then you can all kind of collaborate and not just fix the like most basic details, but actually adjust the sort of more subtle details as well. Yeah. Like so that's fun, and then doing that kind of work for other people's creations then helps me, I think, to be a better writer and creator of my own fiction and nonfiction work. So Pose definitely for queer representation. In books, I think now you've put me on the spot, and I think I'm I was
going to, in a similar vein, ask about BDSM and kink representation as well, and see if you had any recommendations for watching and reading on that vein as well. But I guess Pose kind of falls into both of those.
It definitely does. Pose is just like my answer for everything.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay.
I'll have to
you know what has great queer representation is the new cartoon of She-Ra that is on Netflix.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Just watched the most recent season, and it is it's also really interesting. Okay, like so much of my work is very adult. Like a lot of my work is like literally in the genre of adult, and then even my work that is like not actually technically like hardcore pornographic is definitely like for adults. So even if it's not rated X, it's rated R.
Sure.
So it's actually, and then a lot of the time like queerness to me is so tied up in like wanting to have like representations of queer sexuality, which for the most part is mostly appropriate for adults. And so actually it's Noelle Stevenson, right, who used to do Lumberjane, who does the She-Ra show.
Amazing creator, yeah.
It's really rad actually for me to see how she's taken something that it's like maybe for who's like supposed to be watching that show. I mean, I definitely know 12, a lot of grown-ups.
12-year-old.
That's right, yeah.
And to see how you can have like gender identity and also a certain amount of like age appropriate like romance, like I like you, or like a little like peck on the cheek, or I have a crush on you, or whatever, like dating that is like appropriate for that age.
Oh, she's always at it.
because so much of the critique from morons who don't know what they're talking about of like why there shouldn't be queer representation in like anywhere is that it is like the seduction of the innocent, right?
That's right.
Going
That's
back
the
to
most. That's the most important form of representation because it shapes people's worldviews. So, if ever there was a place for representation,
I think it's
for young queer kids to be able to realize, to like see themselves and to
normal.
not or even if it's weird, it's like weird in a way that is like healthy and okay and like deserving of love and friendship and community and there's even a genderqueer character on the show who is voiced by an out genderqueer actor. And I also think that like that's a really important dynamic that I'm glad that people are talking about more is like having character representation of all these like marginalized and underrepresented groups is really, really great. And you know, and when it means like work, because it's also an economic concern, right? Because a lot of these folks that are marginalized in terms of representation are also marginalized economically, right? And so including in general. So,
it goes hand in hand.
And to have also people behind the scenes, whether they are the actors or the writers, directors, crew, you know, everybody that, you know, especially in these days, like anytime you can give somebody who is having a rough time, and now the people who have been having a rough time economically are having an even rougher time in today's global crisis. Giving them jobs and giving them money is so important. And then you also have people involved who are like, hey, that is not how like a black person would do their hair, or like that is not like that's not how a genderqueer person would want to be identified in this moment. And so I think that behind the scenes as well as like the fictional characters are really important.
For sure. It's funny you mentioned Noelle Stevenson because we talked to her a bit on. So we did an episode. Myself and Ainsley, one of the moderators from our Facebook groups, did a LGBT plus episode on comics representation in comics. It was so fun to do, but we talked a lot about Lumberjanes because there is Joe is trans in that series, and the way they handle it is very appropriate for children, and it's so cool to see because you rarely see that. In SfSx, for anyone that hasn't read it, there is this conglomerate called the Party, who are, I guess, you could sort of align them with the Republican Party, if I had to guess, in some senses. And then you've got the Dirty Mind, which is sort of this underground sex club. We're in this dystopian future where sex and kink and BDSM is all being wiped out, and we're heading back towards purity. So this made me think, you've heard of the concept, Tina, of like the age of decadence, which is like the precipice to, you know, our whole world ending. Do you believe that there is an in-between from age of decadence to total abstinence, or are both of those concepts totally ridiculous?
God, you guys are just delighting me with these questions. These are
we're so happy to have you.
these are so great.
Ree is our local genius. We just sit here and smile, and then Ree does this stuff. It's great.
You know, I have this collection of clippings, because I'm analog like that, of like anytime I'm reading a newspaper or a magazine and there's something in it that is even tangentially related to a theme that I want to explore in SfSx, I like tear it out and hold on to it. And I actually have this article from a few years ago that I held on to and that I kept not reading because I knew it was going to make me so upset. And then quarantine, I finally was like, I'm going to tackle this article, and it's a very long article from The Atlantic from a few years ago about the history of the evangelical movement in America, and basically it's written by like a prominent evangelical writer who is also he's like a secular journalist who is also, you know, evangelical. And I really appreciate, I'm not a religious person, but I really appreciate, because so much religious thought is very like, my magical sky friend said so, right? Like I really appreciate like intellectually rigorous, historically grounded, like reasoned writing about like the role of religion, and even just to be able to learn about like the history of of something like the evangelical movement, which has such a huge influence on like how we conceive of morality in America. Anyway, so this article, which I did finish and I recommend, I got through it, kind of talks about like psychologically why sort of resentment at the perception of being marginalized made evangelicals sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like I don't want to say like sort of primed the pump for Trump to be able to exploit them, and in a way like they've exploited Trump and he's exploited them right back. It's a mess over here. But anyway,
True.
I learned something. I all agree. And something that I had like maybe heard about, but I really learned more about from this article is the idea of I think it's called post-millennialism, like the idea that before that evangelicals used to hold that before the second coming of Christ, ever heard of him, that there was going to be like a period of like peace and on earth, and that was going to signal him. And then over the past century, evangelicals have moved into actually like an understanding or like a stance that like the second coming of Christ is going to be preceded by sort of like what you were saying, like an age of decadence, or basically like a descent into like a satanic like cesspool on earth, right? Which is going to be signaled by degraded moral.
Sounds like a blast.
But yeah, so that the idea is like, well, Christ is the only person who can like clean up all of this like decadence that we're enjoying so much in free world. So yeah, I mean, it was really interesting to read about it in the context of how a despot like Trump could appeal to folks who have that worldview and who don't actually have sort of like a basis of like the relationship between their like religious beliefs and like what they believe like moral and social life should be. So anyway, I'm not like a theologian, but I definitely like the party is, you mentioned the Republican Party, and I do think that they are that my invention of this like extremely conservative sort of religious right like powerful government organization that has like infiltrated American life in this like in policing and incarceration, in definitely like primarily what you see in the first arc of SfSx that's going to be in the trade out on July 22nd is the way that it has, that they're using like bureaucracy and the sort of like banality of evil to affect people's lives, is definitely based on like evangelicals and this sort of idea of that like if you can control people's sex lives, then you can gain power over them, and that's something that I always believed. And so I don't want to say that I don't want to say I'm anti-religion or anti-Christian, but I am anti people telling me what to do.
Anti-control.
And
I'm sorry. Yeah. So we literally could do this all day. And by the way, just spoiler warning. After we're done recording, we're going to ask you to continue doing it at a later date. So hopefully we can get that. But I would like to move in to talk about SfSx a little bit. And I wanted to, I was reading that you guys, that you were starting to create this in like 2017-ish. Is that right?
That's right.
So did you think you'd be where you're at today? So this is actually pretty successful. You would know the numbers better than me. Did you expect this to blow up and the way it has?
Well, thank you for saying it. I am so well, I'm so happy that people are responding to the comic. Obviously, anytime you make something, it always is so gratifying um, when people respond to it. I don't know, like I live like a uh, deliberate child-free existence. I mean, I have like, I'm like a queer uncle to like other people's kiddos, but like my life is like child free, so I really am like the kind of homo that like believes that like my art is my children, so when I like so to have like labored over the like gestation of this comic for so long, and to imagine being pregnant for 3 years.
Yeah.
It sounds miserable, actually, though. So,
yeah, but then I do. It really does. I imagine it's sort of like the feeling of seeing like people like make friends with your kiddo, and you're like, or people like thinking that like your baby's cute, and it's like, I made that.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I mean, SfSx did go through a bit of an ordeal, and definitely like involved some like grief and some like perseverance and some like changing of the crew involved. But I'm so happy to be at Image. I mean, I could go on and on about how great it is to be published by Image Comics, again, as somebody who's been reading Image Comics for like as long as they've been around, but also like, even during the COVID crisis, Eric Stevenson is sending out these pretty consistent newsletters to the creators, like letting us know, like, this is what's happening with Diamond distributors, this is what's happening with comic shops. Honestly, I was sort of in the depths of like, what am I doing? And then like late March, I was like, what am I doing with my life? And then I got a message from Image, like encouraging us all to like do what we can with our audiences to remind people to support their local comic book stores. And I got in touch with Anyone Comics in Brooklyn, who were sending comics out by bike courier, and was like, come on my Instagram, we'll talk about comics, we'll talk about what you guys are doing. And they're like, they're still doing business, like they're doing okay. And so like that makes me feel like I'm a part of an ecosystem of creators and business people who are like, we're all in this, who like recognize that we're all in this together, instead of being like mercenary, which a lot of people can be. And they've, they updated us about like what's going on with like the Image app, like digital sales versus like other places that you can buy comics digitally. And I feel like I'm learning more about the industry by working with them. And I feel like a lot of the time when you work for a bigger company, they actually kind of deliberately try to keep you in the dark about how things work, which does not work for me as well. Right. So I'm really happy, and I'm so happy that my dream about SfSx was that the people, like you've mentioned, who are represented in this comic, who are not represented in nearly enough, even just comic books, like who are like queer folks and sex workers and kinky folks and poly folks, would who maybe are not comics readers, would learn to read comics, and would learn what a pull list is, and would learn like the difference between single issues and like following them once a month versus when they're collected in the trade. And like people keep saying like, you're writing a graphic novel, and I'm like, I didn't write a graphic novel. Like, let me explain the difference to you. You guys get it. But like, it's been really it's been so nice to see those people like come to comics, and then I'm like, let me recommend the Wicked and the Divine to you. Like, let me recommend. Like, I just started reading Black Magic last night, like, which is so good. And
I love it. I want to get that tattoo that Rowan's got on the arm. Yeah, but I have to look up what the symbol means first. But I love that series. So good.
That's very smart. Wow.
You know what?
I don't want to attract.
Fuck
bad
it. Just do
people.
it. Just do it.
I have the key to hell from
nice.
Sandman.
That's
Awesome.
awesome. That's awesome.
Sometimes I'm like, oh, I wonder if this is actually like some weird occult symbol that is.
Yeah.
Someday somebody's gonna show up and be like, it's your turn to be sacrificed. You have.
Yeah, you did the thing. Like, wait,
Sorry,
Mark
I'm
of the
jumping
Beast is
over.
real? Sorry, go ahead.
What do you think about the Sandman series that's coming out?
Oh, I think it's really great. I got a chance at New York Comic Con 2 years ago to meet some of the folks that were working on it, and some of the editors and writers and artists, and I think it's really great. I don't actually know if I'm supposed to talk about this, but I just will say that I did write a Dreaming like single issue for DC, and it has been like fully illustrated. It's like ready to go, and I have no idea like how DC works with these sort of like inventory issues. It sort of seems like, hey, maybe now during like shelter in place, like, might be a good time to like release this thing that is totally made and amazing. So that was really, it was, I mean, clearly I like grew up on Sandman, and it was really fun to write something in that world, and hopefully one day people will get to read it. It is really gross.
That's awesome.
Really, really gross.
That's exactly what we need in our life.
Yeah.
More grotesquerie. That's what I'm here for.
Horror, gross. We love that.
I would like to write more horror. There are some elements of horror in SfSx, but it would be really fun to like write more monster stuff and more body horror, and yeah. Well, so maybe that's in the works.
Read anything you put out.
So I got a question about SfSx, but just real quick before that, who's your favorite endless?
Oh my god. I feel like I want to give my thoughts on all of them. I was rereading some Sandman recently and kind of feeling surprised that they're like all kind of insufferable. Like,
hey, except Delirium, she's lovable.
Yes, she's she there have definitely been times when I would have said that she was my favorite, but probably for Tori Amos reasons. And I also feel like if I say Death, that is just so obvious, and also if I say the Desire, who is like, you know, androgynous and sort of like evil and deceptive, that also is like super obvious. You know what? Weirdly, just to be contrary, I'm gonna say Destruction, because I like, first of all, like, what a daddy, and second of all, I think that maybe I relate more now than I did when I was 12 to like somebody being like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like burnout.
Yeah.
Like Destruction is like burnt out.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just want to like live on an island.
Chill.
Leave me the fuck alone. I'll grow out my beard.
Relatable AF.
Yeah.
Mood.
I honestly haven't thought about it, but I think for the time being, I'm going to say the Destruction is
They're actually coming out with a new one.
So,
and the whole nightmare.
Are they?
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good idea. I love that.
All right.
So here's a question. The party blames. It seems like the party is multifaceted, not just as to what they represent, but the kind of people that make up the party. Totally. And I thought it was interesting that Judy keeps calling herself a feminist. and that she considers herself a feminist. And I'm wondering who, when you're writing that, who are you addressing, and what was the reasoning behind that?
If it's not clear to the viewers, real quick, just so you know, we're jumping in the comic book. Comic book starts now, for sure.
Oh yeah, this is the spoiler.
Spoiler zone.
They're like,
Oh, yeah.
Spoiler
Marty,
zone
like,
begins now.
is he talking about Republicans?
Spoiler.
What the hell's going on here? Yes, kinda, but comic book, go.
Oh my god, I just spoiled Sandman. I should have given a.
Yeah, no, you're
Where
good.
is
We'll put
this
something in.
shit? So the thing about feminism, that's the sound of people like changing channels. No, tune in. This is gonna be interesting. I promise.
Those people
the
were
thing-
gone like 10, 20 minutes ago. So
Really good point. Thanks for sticking around, everybody. So, God, I'm so self-conscious about touching my face. My hands are washed right now. I feel like
We're not judging.
I'm more likely to touch my face, I think, like when I'm like talking to people on a screen than when I'm outside, which is good.
makes sense.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so these new taboos. So the thing about feminism is that there are, if people are not familiar with, there is generally like understood to be like eras of feminism, since like roughly the late 60s, that are called waves. And the second wave of feminism from roughly the 1980s was really defined by this idea that pretty much all sexuality, especially sort of, the word decadence has come up a lot, like decadent, glamorous, extreme sexuality and like depictions of sexuality, especially pornography, or even just like sort of like sexual clothes, like and like sort of extreme gender expression, like high heels or like really like bold makeup or lipstick, was all a tool of the patriarchy, right? And like in some ways, intellectually, as a feminist myself, I understand the reasoning behind that, but unfortunately, the strongest voices in this wave of feminism, including people who are still considered like synonymous with just like the like what feminism represents throughout the ages, like Gloria Steinem, and some other second wave feminists are Catherine McKinnon, who is a prominent legal scholar, and Andrea Dworkin, who was in many ways an amazing writer and activist, who just like I like intellectually disagree with about like basically everything, but like I was saying about evangelical journalists, like it's very important to me to sort of like try to figure out like where I do overlap with people who I just seem to be like diametrically opposed to. Anyway, so Judy Borman, who is one of the big bads of the first arc of SfSx, is definitely a second wave feminist. I mean, like I watched this one like 2-hour interview between Charlie Rose and Catherine McKinnon, like to sort of like psych myself up to write like a lot of Judy Borman's rhetoric. So, it's not like ripped off, but it's sort of like kind of like getting
reflects
her
that ideology.
reasoning and her ideology in my head, and sort of her cadence in my head, to then sort of be like, okay, and now how could this kind of the project of the villainy of SfSx for me is like, how would a powerful religious right exploit people who might otherwise be allies to our heroes, who are sort of the most like extreme radical like underground like sex freaks and sex rebels,
So
how
clever.
might they exploit like feminists, or even in the case of Dr. Powell, who's one of the other big bads, white gay men like how could they be like exploited and activated by this like larger religious power to say like, hey,
just like how the Republicans exploit like different groups that are mostly ideologically unrelated, like.
Exactly.
Brilliant.
I mean, thank you. I mean, it does come from being a journalist and activist and sort of trying to apply this to this like science fiction world. And and honestly, you know, I've said this a million times, but like when I started to write this story, I read this Alan Moore book. I mean, it's really just like kind of a long essay on like his advice about writing comics. And one of, I think, the best pieces of advice that Alan Moore gave in this book was, if you're going to write horror, which I think also includes this sort of like institutional horror of dystopia, then you got to think about what really scares you. And it seems so sort of simple and like pat, but it was actually really useful for me writing, because I had to kind of ask myself, like, not like what seems like it would be scary in a story, but to really sit back and be like, what fucking freaks me out? And something that really freaks me out is being a feminist and knowing that there are people out there who have the wrong idea about that all feminists are anti-sex, that all feminists are anti-high heels, that all feminists are anti-sex work or anti-porn, and that all feminists are humorless and have no taste and no style.
Feminazis. Yep.
Yes, feminazis, exactly. And so part of how I wanted to critique that was by creating this woman who, like, in effect, she, like, Judy Borg is a feminazi.
Yeah.
Like, in the literal sense of the term, like, she is sort of, like, I sort of accentuated the parts of second wave feminist ideology that I actually see as quite fascist, which is like, it is, again, like what I was saying about like, the thing that I object to about religion is not religion per se, but when people take the attitude, like, in order for their worldview or their spirituality to be legitimate, that they have to force everyone to fall in line.
That's right.
Like, that's the definition of fascism. Right. And so I kind of tried to see like the similar ways that those different groups work, and then think about like, well, what if they're all working together? Now that scares the shit out of me.
Scary.
Yeah. For sure.
That dystopian future is definitely scary on so many levels, and I love the way there's like this multi-layered nuance, and like you said earlier, it's not any one way. I'll be full disclosure. You know, I had a certain upbringing to where in recent history I'm becoming more and more, I guess you would say, if we had to throw a label on it, progressive. And I'm still learning and like, oh, wow, and kind of realizing where I was wrong in the past. And even still, I'm still learning. And I read your you know, your book, SfSx, and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I'm like, and then it just kind of draws questions, and it promotes thought, and that like you said, that academic rigor that is required, because not everything fits into a black and white box. And I love the whole story about it. I'm gonna ask you a question.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm gonna ask you a question. It's gonna be our last general question, and then we're gonna, if it's okay with you, I know it's still kind of new, but we're gonna go into a spoiler zone, and then people can stop watching there if they haven't read it yet. But last general question is, so in your book we have definitely two clear factions. We have the Dirty Mind, and we have the Party, and I mean, they're going to go head to head. And so when you look at the effect of the Party, even in its real life, what would you say, I guess, version, there are other people who are going to be affected by it. So like you have with the main characters, George and Avery, right? So they are sitting in the main society and are affected and are oppressed. Are we going to see people outside the Dirty Mind that are not, or more of that are not the Party or the Dirty Mind, and you know, without giving spoilers, but are we going to see more of that other? Is there a third faction maybe?
Yes. You know what's so funny about like the thing, like talking to you guys doesn't feel like doing press. It feels like we're all creators and we're like having a
Exactly.
conversation.
Yeah. It's supposed to feel like that. So good. We're doing good.
Cool. Yeah, you're doing good. It's also kind of cheating because it's like I'm like gathering information about like what people want to see.
Yeah, that's So if we could affect that, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have you're not the first person to ask like, is this going on outside San Francisco? And like what actually was the inciting incident that made it so that like did this happen gradually or all at once? And I think to like answer your question, I'll say that I have been thinking about how to show more of the details of the dystopian world, because right now with the 7 issues that are out, it is kind of like more in the background. And I love the economy of writing comics. You just really kind of gotta like every panel, every page, every issue has to like be propulsive and be right to the point and like advance all the characters' arcs and also like have cool fighting and things exploding.
Which this book definitely does have.
Which it does.
It does,
yeah. So, that was a fun thing to learn and just sort of figure out like, ooh, it's been a while since anything has blown up. We should blow something up. And like this fight scene would just like this fight scene should have purple smoke because it's a comic.
Right.
And so, but I do want to show more, maybe even just like general everyday people. And there is a teaser at the end of issue 7 of sort of a larger world. And I guess you also do get to see in issue 7, without being too specific, like kind of the average citizen who is like pro party, like how they are, just how what they think and how they're behaving. And yeah, I mean, listen, I would like to keep writing in this world for a really long time, and so I think that showing more of that, and also even through the characters that we've met already, like one character that comes to mind is Denis, like we get a sense of what their backstory is with being like rejected by their parents, and being put through conversion therapy essentially, but also like, yeah, we could see more of that in a flashback. I have some ideas for a flashback for Nick and like kind of Nick's origin story. So nice. I think that like I like the idea of playing with time and kind of even like flashing back from what is like the present in the story, even though it takes place like somewhere in the 21st century.
That's
but
like a prequel, like an internal prequel kind of thing going. Yeah,
like prequel, which would like maybe still be like our future, but
That's
like the past of like the current characters. So yes is my answer. I would like to show that more, and maybe also show what's going on outside of San Francisco.
All right, at this point we're gonna enter spoilers. And so one thing I want to give out to the people is trigger warnings. I'm going to put up graphics of the comic book. And so if you don't want to see the art, and if you don't want to see the spoiler, and they will be sexually graphic art, censored so that YouTube doesn't kick us off. But this is your chance to turn it off or go read the book. Make sure to hit it up.
Hey, so Tina, so I'm kind of a villain guy. I like my Dooms, my Magnetos, my Mr. Sinisters,
Magneto
and oh, absolutely, 100%. Jones is fucking terrifying. She's the scariest villain ever.
Yes.
And this is definitely a horror comic. Make no mistake, everybody. But Jones torturing George, completely chilling. And I think the scariest thing about her is just the totality of her indoctrination, because she doesn't flinch. There's nothing. Like even when you think, and that worked on me, by the way.
Yeah.
That trick totally worked on me.
Yeah, the
But even
hug,
when you
and like,
think,
is this it?
She's just, she's done. She's gone. There's no more Jones.
Yeah.
She's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
This is just I thank you. I could bask in this all day. I'm so glad that affected you in that way.
Yeah. I tell you what, if you
can I say that moment, that like fake out
Yeah.
moment from, I guess it's issue 6, to me would be nothing without Jen Hickman's art. Like that is just such an example of like how amazing it is to work with, to like really vibe with an artist. And when I wrote it, I wrote it like a year before I had even met Jen Hickman. So to especially that the panel of Sylvia's face when she's holding the gun to the back of Jones's head, and
Yeah.
ooh,
Yeah.
I love
That is-
how that sequence turned out. Yes, I'm so glad
So
that it
crazy.
affected you.
If you plan to have a redemption arc, that's going to be extremely interesting to see how that goes, because she seems irredeemable right now. That's crazy.
Well, did she electrocute
That's
electrocute to
ambiguous,
death?
isn't it?
Or
Yeah.
did she survive?
Well,
I hope she survived.
that's
'cause-
been left unsaid,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Get
I love
issue
you
number
bring
8.
up horror with that. I love that you bring up horror with that, because that's another example of like me asking myself like what is the scariest thing that I can think of, and like your friend being indoctrinated, even if without like sort of sci-fi supernatural brainwashing. Like I feel like a lot of people can relate to like you have a friend who you feel like you see eye to eye with, and then like time goes on or something like that, and they become more conservative, or whatever it is for you, they like come to embrace something that you used to bond over hating. That's like so horrifying. But also, to me, one of the scariest things in monster stories, I feel like my high contrast light is really distracting. Okay. One of the scariest things in like lots of different like monster tropes is like the monster that looks like your friend, or the like whether it's a vampire that is like now still kind of your friend but evil, and and you see that or a zombie, obviously, like somebody who is like has the body of your loved one but
gone.
is
they're
they're basically gone, but this threat to you now resembles them, or like pod people, or shapeshifters, or ghosts possessing people, right? Like that idea that like the foe that you have to face like has the face of someone that you love, and like asking yourself like could you defend yourself? Could you conquer this thing that you like need to conquer to protect yourself and your loved ones, or your way of life, or whatever, if it's like resembled, and especially that tragedy of like, do you want to have hope that they could be redeemed, or that they could be restored? And like if you killed, like, as when Sylvia kills Jones, like she sees it as an act of mercy, but there's also this like tragedy of like they have not explored the possibility that she could be like put back the way that she was. And like what if later they find out, like what is that movie, the Fog, where like everybody kills themselves before they're right?
The Mist. The Mist, where that was powerful. Not to go into that, but God, that was
but to me that sort of like tragic irony is so sad and scary. And the other idea with Jones was like, I'm a very kinky person, and I've like made a lot of, I both like am a creator and consumer, like fan of like pretty like extreme like kinky stories, and even porn, and like I love dynamics of like power exchange and torture, like in an erotic and consensual context. And so then the idea that somebody who, like Jones, is really, really, really good at like torturing people consensually, and then to have her mind warped so then she's torturing people unconsensually, but kind of with
ball
the
gag.
style. What's that?
The ball gag panel that was right after the flashback to the consensual BDSM was like such way juxtaposed, like the non-consensual with the torture with the consensual. I was like, fuck.
Yeah.
It was yeah. So, hey, I'm sorry, Luke, if you're watching this. I always talk to Luke. I'm not even sure if he watches our show. He's our comic book store owner, and I got mine off of Apple Books because I really didn't want to wait, and I got all my stuff and I wanted to read everything before this. And the way it goes is you flip, and the way Apple Books sets it up is he's having sex with Avery, and it's consensual, and it's the last panel in the bottom right, and I have to swipe to go to the next thing, and then boom, and it's like, I'm like, and then he's this teary-eyed, and it's not, and I'm like, oh, and I have to like swipe back, and so I'm like, that's so good. So good.
Yeah. That is.
Yeah.
So I texted him. Well, we were writing our notes, and he sent me a text with like screenshot, and I was like, I know. And we were like,
yeah.
Oh, you guys are just really just making my day. You're just making my day. Thank you.
Well, Tina, you play with stuff a lot. Like, I wrote some notes about you in your interviews and stuff in the back of the issues. You've talked about how you're having fun with flipping stereotypes. You've got the male damsel in distress. I think you said that in a Rolling Stone interview as well. But what I laughed at was like the smartwatches are called halos, and that is just so funny to me because we're all against the idea of the government tracking us, but then we all happily carry around like our smartphones and tablets, which are essentially doing the same thing. Right. But then you've got this bathroom panic scene, which to me just made me laugh so much because essentially for anyone that's read it, what happens is they're trying to infiltrate the party, the Dirty Mind. One of them almost gets caught by security, and she says, "Oh, there's a man in the woman's bathroom," and just panic ensues. And it's like it's so funny because
so relevant.
It's commentary on
and she's she's trans, so you also like you really in that moment I hope people like get the sense of one of the early pieces of advice that I got from the first editor that worked on the book was that every character has to sort of have like the way that they fight the villain or the way that they achieve their goal is with the thing that makes them special, right? So like he sort of asked me like what makes each of these individual characters special, and also what makes sex workers special, what gives them power, right? So when you think about it in the clearest terms with like the Avengers, you're kind of like, okay, like what is this person's bow and arrow? What is this person's Iron Man
like
suit? What is this person?
Pole dancing when they're infiltrating the. Yeah, I love that. I love how.
Yeah, exactly, and that's kind of like where that monologue came from of Avery being like, you want to know what's in the gap in my resume? Like, here's what it is, and by the way, I'm going to use all of it to run from the cops right now. So you kind of you get the sense that. Like Sylvia, when I had the idea of, okay, we need to build some tension here. It can't just be so easy for them to, you got to create characters and then you got to put a bunch of shit in their way. Like that's what fiction writing is, I've learned. And so for to make it more difficult, I was like, okay, Sylvia can't just like sneak off and make it upstairs. She has to like encounter a guard. What would Sylvia do with like her back up against the wall, and like the idea that she could like weaponize trans bathroom panic in order to escape that situation? That's just the kind of, I mean, it's really cathartic also to imagine a world in which the things that are so devastating and depressing and demoralizing and in some ways like really sort of like life constraining oppressions that we have to deal with. The idea that those things would be our superpowers is it's a nice feeling.
Hey, Judy Borman and the whole party actually appears to be on the side of transphobia. Just she's from the monologues. For sure. Yeah.
The TERF and a SWERF, yeah.
So I'm wondering, is Wilder an incel?
Yes.
Ah.
Yes, that's
There
definitely
you go.
that you have that is, I will give you guys this this tip, or this inside scoop, I don't know. I have been working in quarantine on the next arc, and the big bad is going to be Wilder. At least part of the villainy is going to be Wilder, and I did set up in his speech the idea of like MRAs and incels, and the other aspect of it that I am playing with is the idea of sex robots. And so we will, and sort of the idea, there's like a little teaser in issue 7 of Wilder having a manifesto about intimacy distribution. So, which is like a real thing that men's rights activists think should happen. And so again, it's like, you can't make this shit up.
No.
Like, all you have to do is like, okay, so what do these imbeciles think? Incel imbeciles think, and then sort of putting it in a situation of like, okay, guys, like here is what it would look like. So I am working on that, but even however that goes, and however long it might have to be delayed for budget reasons with the COVID crisis, that is definitely canon already. It's teased in the last 2 issues, and it's definitely and it's funny too, because when I wrote issue 1, I was very excited about the idea of the stiletto to the cop's eye, but it wasn't until after I'd written that I was like, oh, what if that cop that gets stilettoed in the eye actually ends up being like a bigger villain. So that was
Ree's actually the one who brought that up, and when it was like a little snowball off the top of a mountain, it was just like, whoa, I'm like, yeah, and he gets hurt by a woman, but it was his fault, but he makes it the woman's fault, and it was like, yeah, he's a fucking incel. And I was gonna be really disappointed if you had said something like, oh, not really, but yeah, sure, I guess that works. No, we had an epiphany last night. So we are pretty much out of time. I did want to say one thing here. At the end, one of the most powerful points of the book for me was at the end when the party is exposed. You get everything that's wrong with them, and the guy at the bonfire is like, "Fuck it." I feel like it was so powerful to me because when you sit there and you look at the tweets and the recordings and the hidden stuff, and you're like, clearly now, right, guys? And everyone's just kind of like, fuck it, we're good. Was that what you were kind of going for? Because that was like super powerful. I'm like, God damn, that's fucking where we're at.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I did want to give the protection arc a bleak ending, and
I'd say so.
I like kind of like I wanted to kind of have it both ways, where you get to have this great moment of like victory and catharsis, where they get to like say what they're all about, and like the Dirty Mind gets to say what they're all about, and Avery gets to say what she's all about, and the idea that I mean, I've had that experience of being like, cool, I've made it, and now like everything's gonna be okay, and then you're like, oh shit, actually, like the world keeps like throwing shit at you, and that's also just sort of pragmatically like a good way of like maintaining the tension for
the story's not over. Yeah.
The story is definitely not over. Yeah.
Tina Horn, writer of SfSx, Volume 1 is going to come out, what did you say, July 22nd.
That's right.
Don't do like me and give money to Apple. pre-order it from your local comic book store. You want to plug? I don't want to get the name wrong. I didn't write it down. Plug your podcast one more time. Why?
It's Why Are People Into That?
Why are people into that?
You can subscribe and listen wherever you pod.
That's right. And again, make sure to check out our stuff. It's awesome. We don't invite people on here that we think are lame. So do that. Tina Horn. Tina Horn, thank you for coming out. Any last words?
Thanks, Tina.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun, and it is nice that this is the kind of thing that we can still do and make and connect on, even while we're all keeping ourselves safe and other people safe during quarantine and social distancing. And I am so happy to meet folks like you, and I can't wait to watch and listen to your whole show. And I guess also, if people want to follow me on social media, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at TinaHornSass.
That's right. Tina Horn's ass. Just in case anybody can't
or
spell.
Tina Horn Sass.
That, yeah, I love it.
Oh, yeah, that's way better.
If you want
Get your mind out of the gutter.
I was like, I read it. I was like, Tina Horn's ass. I'm like, okay.
That's
you
also
want to follow, thanks so much, guys, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Subscribe, ring the bell, and be free. Follow our links and watch our show because you want to and not because of the threats. Thank you for watching Judah, Robo, and Ree. We talk about comics, movies, and TV. Sometimes we have notable guests, and sometimes it's just us. But we're also cool.